Thank you, everyone, for joining us for a book launch. And the book is The Hotel on St. James Place. And I wanted to first thank our co-sponsors. And I'm just going to give it the way that it is on the flyer. The first is the Sarah and Sam Show for Holocaust Resource Center at Stockton University. And Irvin, could you just give a shout out and hello?
Hello, everyone.
And Morgan?
Hi, everyone. Nice to see you.
And myself, Gail Rosenthal. Welcome and thank you for joining us. We have here Josh Cutler. And Josh, could you just give a shout out, please, and tell us what you do at the JCC?
No problem. It's good to see everyone's face today. I run the programs and the summer camp over at the Jewish Community Center in Margate, and happy to be here as one of the co-sponsors of this program.
Thank you. And Mona, just because Yiddish starts with a Y, you're towards the end. Mona, would you give a shout out on behalf of the Yiddish Club? And I call you the Yiddish Club president.
Thank you. I miss my Yiddish cousins, and I'm glad who have come to the Zoom, and hopefully soon maybe we can see each other in person after everyone is vaccinated. I miss our connection.
Thank you. And wow, thank you for using the word connection. So again, I want to encourage all of you, please, to put your cameras on to join us because we become connected. Our program will begin it's already begun, but it will formally begin in a minute or two. And I wanted to tell you the format. From the time we begin to about 4 o'clock, we will be having a discussion with our author, Molly. And if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and Morgan and Irvin will be handling that. Morgan, can you explain exactly what we mean by put it in the chat? Because there may be a few of us that don't know where the chat box is.
Sure. So everyone, on the bottom of your screens, there is a menu and you'll see a button that says chat. So you just click on that and your chat will appear on the right-hand side of your screen. And you want to make sure that the question goes in the chat box there, either directly to Irvin or I or to the general chat box, and we will see them there.
And that's how we're going to initially handle the questions. After my first preliminary questions to Molly. And then at 4 o'clock, we will no longer be recording. I'm so proud to say, it's like my grandchildren, I'm so proud, my students are here. And at that point, they're welcome to leave, they're welcome to stay. And those of you that are not members of the Yiddish Club and it doesn't, you don't want to participate in the Yiddish Club short meeting, which will be about 30 minutes, you may leave. I will stay on because I am a member of the Yiddish Club, although my Yiddish is just a bissel, meaning just a little. So anybody have, did I leave anything out, Irvin or Morgan? I don't think so. So we will move forward. Molly, please introduce yourself to us. And notice I'm not saying your last name because I'm so worried that I'm going to mispronounce it.
Okay. Thank you, Gail, and nice to see everybody on Zoom. My name is, for those of you who don't know me, Molly and Gail Golubcow. So it's really not that scary, but you're not the only one who goes through this. When I was a kid in school, the teachers would, the first day of school would run the roster by and Susie Smith and Johnny Brown. And then she'd get to me and say, Molly. And then there was like panic in the teacher's face. She would just freeze and panic. And then they try the first syllable, G. And so you are not alone, Gail.
Thank you. Molly, so many of us are wondering, even my students said, why did she write a book? Why did you write the book?
Why did I write a book? Well, I guess it's a twofold answer. One is we're all familiar with the phrase never forget. And so my parents were Holocaust survivors, and I heard that phrase a lot. And I wanted to write the stories that are contained in this book because I didn't want, generically speaking, many stories to ever be forgotten. You know, the 6 million who we lost, and all the stories in between. The other half of the reason I wrote the book is I specifically didn't want my parents' stories to be forgotten. So, so between generically trying to keep the concept alive of never forgetting, and then I wanted their story specifically never to be forgotten.
And there are a few of us here that are on the Zoom that are not familiar with the term never forget. Could you please tell us what that means?
Well, you know, the concept of never forgetting what happened, because when you forget or do not understand history, it has a tendency to repeat itself and come back and bite you in the you know where. So it's sort of a cry that Jews have had since the end of World War II, that we strive to never forget what happened and to document everything that happened and tell and retell and repeat in any way, shape, or form we can, loud and clear, so people do not forget the horrors of the Holocaust.
So this is a great introduction to asking you, can you share with us the brief life stories of your parents, including their arrival to America and living in New York City, and then beginning new lives in Vineland, New Jersey? And please share with us their names.
Okay. I cover these stories in the book as well, you know, sort of their migration from Miori, Poland, a very small town in what is now Belarus, to eventually ending up in Atlantic City, of all places. So after the war, my parents, they were not married before the war. So after the war, they met back in Miori, the towns or the area where they were from. They married, and then they were in a displaced persons camp in Germany, where my brother was born. My mother had an uncle in New York City who sponsored the family, and they came to New York. My brother loves to tell this date on July 4th, 1950. So Independence Day and all that. So they lived in New York for probably a year, I believe. And then there was this call to, you know, have your own place, your own home, your own farm in Vineland. A lot of Holocaust survivors were already there. Many of you are familiar with the Alliance and a lot of Holocaust survivors, the Alliance settlement, and the call to farm and agriculture and all that in the Vineland area. And my parents, with my brother, answered that call and moved to Vineland to run a chicken farm. And then I was born in Vineland, and we lived in Vineland till I was in 4th grade, thereabouts. And then we moved to the big city, which was for me Atlantic City. And that's how my family moved from Miori, Poland, to Atlantic City, New Jersey.
So I have a few questions just for some of the information you gave us, because some of us on this Zoom we're doing research on Holocaust survivors of Atlantic, Cape May, and Cumberland counties.
Right.
And this concept of chicken farming is new to our students, by the way, because before they were born, there were no more farms. So let's work backwards to say, can you tell us exactly where the farm was located in Vineland?
It was on Grove Road and East Avenue. We were surrounded by lots of small farms. And we're not talking about Purdue farms or acres. I think our farm was 8 acres, but not all of that was farmable. We had chicken coops. So they were low, kind of shacky structures, and we raised chickens for eggs, primarily for the egg business. And a lot of Holocaust survivors were in the same business, a lot of them.
So you're just feeding into my next question. Do you remember any of the survivors that live near the farms? And what did your father do with the eggs? How did he sell them?
You know, there were small buyers who would come to sell to purchase the eggs. Sometimes people would come to buy a dozen or two. There were probably vendors who relied on coming to my father's farm or other farms. You know, as I said earlier, I moved from the farm. Our family moved when I was, 9 or 10. So the times I spent on the farm, it was mostly, I didn't pay much attention to the family business. I was too busy playing with the chickens, the geese, the dog, the cats, you know.
And I assume you don't remember any of the neighbors.
I do. I remember.
Share those names with us because perhaps their children are on the Zoom now.
The Levins, they were very close friends. The Kinkulkins, the Morginskis. You know, when I speak to other Holocaust survivor children, the reoccurring theme is that a lot of their friends were other Holocaust survivors. And so in Vineland and here in Atlantic City and in Ventnor, most of my parents' friends, probably 99% of them, were other Holocaust survivors. So the house always had Holocaust survivors. In the morning, there'd be sort of the coffee clutch. They'd come for a glace of latte or a cup of coffee. So they'd come play cards in the evening. So there were always Holocaust survivors in and out of the house. Yes.
Right. And, you know, one of the reasons that we teach about is because they had so much in common with each other.
True.
And I tell a quick story that George Greenman said to be on a chicken farm was great, that they spoke everybody's language, Polish, German, Italian, French, you know, etc. So did that help with your parents' skills? Meaning, you know, how was their English? You know, did this make it an easier transition dealing with chickens that everybody can speak chicken? Wink, wink.
Right. Well, the chickens, they were very bilingual. You know, they could understand anybody's, no pun intended, pidgin English, right? So they understood when you threw the feed to them. You know, their seeds, there's the scratch, I think it was called. So your English did not have to be perfect when it came to that.
Thank you for sharing that. And because we have numbers of Holocaust survivor children, and I always explain to my students, when you talk about children, we think of, you know, my grandchildren, 8, 9, 10, 11 years old,
Right.
Children meaning people our age. So we love to teach about what happened immediately after the war. What DP camp were your parents in? Do you know what country and the name of it?
Bad Reichenhall in Germany.
Okay, thank you. And do you happen to know, did your parents ever tell you, did the Joint Distribution Committee help them, or HIAS? Did they receive any aid or help, or the Baron de Hirsch Fund to obtain the farm? And again, this is something I love to share with my students about some of the aid that was available to new immigrants.
I believe so. I believe some of that aid was available. And I think that that was partially how my parents were able to move from New York City to the farm.
Thank you. So talking about your parents, what do you think they would think about the book?
Well, I think being, typical Jewish parents, they probably would be kvelling that their child wrote a book,
I'm sorry, we
and-
don't know what the word kvelling means. Many of us
Okay.
don't know what that means.
Okay, kvel is a Yiddish word for, being proud, boasting, being so proud of, of a child or an accomplishment. So to say kvel is like you really are proud of what your child or whoever has accomplished. If I can tell a little story, my sister-in-law, who I believe is on the Zoom call, she's a professor and she wrote a book. It's an academic book for her students, for her the class that she teaches. So it's an esoteric academic book, and she of course gave my mother a copy. Well, it's not the kind of book my mother would read or understand. It's not an easy beach read, but my mother felt proud enough, kvelling about it. So where did my mother display it? She put it in her china cabinet along with the other tchotchkes, which are little knickknacks and dishes and Judaica, whatever was in the china cabinet. And there it sat, prominently displayed with all her stuff. So if my mother was still with us, I'm going to guess she'd put my book in the china cabinet alongside my sister-in-law.
That's a great answer. And I'd like to read out loud Morgan's chat, because thank you, Morgan, for reading my mind. That says, reminder to all of you, please enter questions for Molly in the chat box, because that's what makes a presentation interesting. It's answering your questions. So these are my questions, but I bet a lot of you have even better questions than I have. So please, we'd love to see some questions in the chat box. Molly, do you think your parents' experiences during the war? And I must go back again, because in your brief life stories of your parents, you didn't tell us where they were during the war, what their ages were. And we know that they didn't know each other during the war. So could you just briefly tell us?
Tell you how they survived the war?
Where they were, how old were they? And they didn't live together prior, they didn't know each other, isn't that correct?
They did know each other.
Okay.
My father was married before the war. He was married and had 2 children who perished in the Holocaust. My father's first wife, Malke, who I'm named after, that was my mother's cousin.
Wow.
So they knew of each other. My mother was 13 years younger than my father. And so they knew of each other, but my mother was, as I said, much, much younger and from a very, very poor household. And my father used this expression a lot. He would say in Yiddish a lot, Hitler was a strange matchmaker. Hitler gewinnt a modner Schatten. And it not only applied to people who married after the war, relationships that you found yourself in, but the war put you in places and situations you would have never, ever have been in if it wasn't for the war. Good, bad, or indifferent. For example, there is no way my family would have ended, my father and mother would have ended up in Atlantic City if it wasn't for a war. There's no way that migration would have happened without the war.
And where was your father during the war?
My father first was, the town was ghettoed in Muir, and he survived. I talk about this in the book. He survived because when they were lined up to be executed in front of the open grave, which was something that happened a lot during the war when they decided to liquidate the ghetto. My father just yelled out, or oh my God, or something along those lines when the inevitable was about to happen. There was a Nazi soldier who just took the back of his rifle butt and said, "You don't have a God," and hit him in the head. As that happened, of course, my father fell. As he fell, the bullets started flying. And so the only reason he survived was that he fell before the bullets. And he was the only one in his family that survived, the only one who survived. He was then hidden by a Polish Gentile for about 18 months. And then he spent the rest of the war in partisans. My mother had a completely different experience during the war. She was working in a post office. The post office was run by the Russians who had invaded Poland from the east. When the Germans invaded on the west, the people in the post office, the Russians said, you know, we should probably move east. So my mother just moved east with this group of people and spent the rest of the war in Russia, in sort of like a work commune, sort of a commune that tended to make objects or things needed for the war effort for the Russians. So they had two totally different experiences in the war.
So then that leads into, thank you. Do you think your parents' experiences during the war destined their personality traits?
Interesting. I don't know. You know, I don't know if they had it in them, that it was part of their DNA to begin with, or that having had a lifetime of sort of persecution and prejudice, and then culminating with the war, if that impacted how they treated people once they came to the United States. I'm not sure. It's like an onion. If you have to unpeel it, I'm not sure. I think they must have had it. It was part of their makeup to begin with. But I think after having seen what people can do to people, how cruel people can truly be, maybe that's something they consciously thought, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to repeat this.
So I'll be very specific on the two traits. And I know that when I discussed this with you on the phone, you were kind of surprised that I said your parents had much empathy and compassion for all. Do you want to, would you please comment on that? Because so many of the vignettes, the stories in the book, are about those that are, and we use this term when we teach about the Holocaust, the other, the person that is different.
Yes. The hotel was full of very unusual characters. The clientele was, many of the clientele were people that a lot of us don't want to associate with. We had transvestites, pimps, prostitutes, drug dealers, drug addicts. We had a lot of people with sad stories and you know, quote unquote, weird stories. But my parents, it's not that they condoned it or agreed with it, but they just sort of had a live and let live attitude. You know, my father would, his philosophy was, I don't care what you do, just do it quietly in your room and pay the rent. So it was, you know, just, you know, very much a live and let live. And my parents had, there was something about them, so almost like a magnet to attract people who needed some kind of help. whether it was a shoulder to cry on or just somebody to tell their story to. And they were very non-judgmental towards these humans who they would have never, they had no experience from shtetl life in Poland. There was not much. Shtetl life in Poland in the 1930s did not give you a lot of opportunities to deal with transvestites and cross-dressers and drug dealers and drug addicts. So the juxtaposition of my parents and the clientele was just an amazing scene, and their openness and empathy was just really, even as a child, I noticed it.
Thank you. I'm going to read a quote from the book. And before I read the quote, some of you may be asking, well, how do I get the book? How can I obtain the book? So if you would share with our audience, and maybe Morgan, you would just write down what, I'm used to saying write, but you know what I mean, put in the chat what Molly tells us. So before I read the quote, because I'm hoping I will whet everybody's appetite for the book, would you tell us how we obtain it? How can we obtain it?
Well, sort of the usual suspects these days: Amazon, online, Barnes and Noble, Books A Million in Mays Landing for local folks. They're supposed to have it stocked in the store. I'm not sure if they have it there yet, but they're working on it. So Goodreads. I think if you Google the book, you'll get all sorts of options to buy it online.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. And maybe at some point, our local libraries will have it.
Oh, they do, actually, I forgot. So the local library should have them. I know Ventnor and Margate does.
Okay, great. And I think one of them is part of the county system.
Yes.
Thank you. So now I'm going to read the quote.
Okay.
The Seacrest, meaning the hotel your parents owned and ran, the Seacrest had its share of sinners. And it's highly unlikely that there was enough holy water at St. Nicholas Church, and by the way, St. Nicholas Church was in the neighborhood, to purge the Seacrest of the confessions that its guests carried with them.
Yes.
So I read the quote, and now I have the question. Who were some of your favorite patrons at the Seacrest Hotel at St. James Place?
Another interesting question, Gail. A favorite, I don't know if I had a favorite person at the hotel. Some of them were my favorites because they were, I was a young teenager and they were college age kids. So I got to hang around with them, being the landlord's daughter. Gave me privileges that a lot of people didn't have, so I could be sort of friends with some of the people. Some of the people were favorites because their stories were so unique, sometimes sad, sometimes funny, sometimes pathetic, but very notable stories that I could sort of observe. And many of them end up in as stories in the book because I wanted to sort of talk about their stories and how they interacted with my parents. But I guess if I had to pick a favorite, it would be the two people I write about in chapter 1 in the first story. It's a pimp and a prostitute, and Fisher and Scooty were their names. And one night, my family woke up to Fisher trying to kill Scooty in the lobby. He was strangling her, probably a financial disagreement, if I had to guess. And my father saved her life. And it's not from brute strength or anything. And I talk about it in the book, but I remember I was probably about 14 or 15. And then I watched the whole thing it took place probably in 20, 30 seconds, the whole thing. But once the strangling stopped and my mother, ushered Scooty away, my father got Fisher to go in an opposite direction. And I remember standing in the lobby and thinking, this is like living in a movie. This could be a movie. And again, the juxtaposition of my parents from a shtetl having to deal with these two people who never in a million years would they have interacted with. And he saved her life. So I guess that to answer your question, I think Fisher and Scooty, and that was the first story I wrote. So that sort of kicked it off that I have to start writing these stories down.
Wow. So I want to note that you and I had a bet, if you remember. I said, and Josh, I hope you're noting this down, that it's another time that I'm wrong. I said, I'll be very happy if we have 25 come participants.
Oh, I win.
Review.
I won.
And you won. Tell them what your bet was.
50.
Yes, and we're over 50. Thank you all. And we're continuing on. And I just want to remind you that this book launch is co-sponsored by the Sam Aziz Museum of Woodbine Heritage, the Sarah and Sam Schofer Holocaust Resource Center, the Yiddish Club. And why I mentioned Josh is because he helped to put this together, representing the Milton and Betty Katz JCC in Margate. Thank you all for participating. We're continuing on. Again, asking those of you that can, please put your cameras on. It makes it cozier. It helps the participants knowing that other people are there, and it certainly helps the presenters. So thank you. So we're just leading into when you said that story, remembering that was kind of your draw into putting the book together. So now, how do you feel now that you finished the book and it's been published?
Relieved. I'm glad it's done. I'm glad it's out there. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm glad my parents' story, their story of surviving the Holocaust and then their resilience to keep on going, and their attitude towards others is in a book. It's always going to be written down and hopefully saved for posterity. And that was my main reason to write the book, is so their story will never be forgotten. And so I accomplished that. And so I'm feeling good about that.
Wow. And I just want to note that Dr. Dinka Hondius sent a message to me and to everyone saying, this is so interesting. And I want to note that Dinka is in Amsterdam.
Oh, wow.
He was our scholar in residence, the Ida E. King Chair in Holocaust Studies at Stockton University, and the leading historian of in the Netherlands on the Holocaust. So
wonderful.
Dinka, we're honored to have you. And we know it's in the middle of the night, so I'm sure you have the toothpicks out, putting them in your eyes. So Molly, what's next for this story? What feedback have you received so far, and what's next?
Well, the feedback has been overwhelmingly, overwhelmingly positive, and that's really good to know, good to hear, and it's sort of taught me some things as well. The feedback I'm getting a lot about the Holocaust. A lot of people have been seeking me out, reaching out to me through social media and that kind of thing, saying things like, somebody I went to junior high school with that I haven't really seen since junior high school or talked to, and people are reaching out to me and saying, I never knew that about your parents. I was at your house several times and I never knew that. And So it's been that's been very interesting. A lot of people, it's hitting a note of nostalgia. People are saying, oh, I could smell the cotton candy. I could smell the Belgian waffles after I read your book. And so it's been interesting to see that it hits a lot of nostalgia and sort of memory notes in a lot of people, whether it's about the war, whether it's about Atlantic City before the casino industry took over. So a lot of interesting and positive feedback. So yeah, so that's what's been going on.
Thank you. I do have more questions, but we want to answer your questions. And there's one question, and then I'll let Morgan and Irvin take over the questions. But I want to answer one question because I have the book in my hand. Judy Landau asked, and Judy, thank you for asking, what is the name of the book? So here we go. I hope you all can see it. It's a gorgeous cover. It's a picture of the hotel.
And the hotel is still on St. James Place. The sign is gone, but surprisingly enough, the hotel is still standing on St. James Place. One of the few structures they didn't tear down to make parking lots for the casinos. Wow. So it's still there. And Gail, if I can say one more thing.
Absolutely, you're the presenter.
So the title of the book is The Hotel on St. James Place, and obviously named for the hotel that's on St. James Place. And when the book went to the publisher called me one day and he said, Molly, we need a subtitle. Okay, and so I was walking on the boardwalk one day, he called me, I answered, and he goes, I got an idea for a subtitle. And he says, how about The Hotel in St. James Place, growing up between the boardwalk and the Holocaust. And I have the phone in my ear and I hear him say that, and it was almost like nails on a chalkboard or static. And I was thinking, how can you put the word boardwalk and Holocaust in the same sentence? I mean, they shouldn't even be in the same paragraph. And as I got over the initial shock, I thought, well, you know what? But that's exactly what the stories in the book are. They're a collection of short stories that I tell, because I'm the narrator, about my parents, Holocaust survivors, in this crazy hotel in the 1970s. And it's as weird as it sounds to have boardwalk and Holocaust in the same sentence. It really does capture the essence of the book. So I have to admit, he was right.
Thank you.
The publisher was right. Yes.
Thank you. Okay, Morgan, Irvin, I don't know who wants to start.
Sure, I can start.
Thank you.
So this question actually comes from Mindel Pierce. Mindel asked, Molly, was your father in the Bielski Brigade? And then she also commented that they are in contact with the only living Bielski.
I don't believe so. I can double check. That doesn't ring a bell, but let me write this down and
We'll put it in the chat for you, and Molly, I'll talk to you afterwards. And the Bielski Brigade was the only all-Jewish partisan group. And there was a film, first Nechama Tech wrote a book about them, and that book was adapted to a film, Defiance.
Okay.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
Yeah,
So he was in the partisan group that had Jews and non-Jews.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct. There
Okay,
were
good.
Russians.
Mendel, you earned the A. Excellent question.
Yes, he gets an A.
Okay.
So Molly, people have been asking this. So throughout the book, readers see these Yiddish words and these sayings, and most of the time, for example, for me as a reader, we can infer the meaning through your prose. But for me personally, I found myself looking up these Yiddish words on Yiddish to English websites online, and I was learning Yiddish. And I just wanted to know, and we wanted to know, was that purposeful?
Purposeful in what way? To get people to learn Yiddish?
Yes.
Well, yes and no, Irvin, because that's what my parents spoke. You know, that's what we spoke in the house. And Irvin, just so you know, I am teaching a conversational Yiddish class now. So you should have signed up. But yes, it was intentional because that's how I heard it. That's how we spoke it. But I tried to be mindful that when I did use Yiddish words and expressions, that I either defined it or made it clear what it was about. And so I hope that worked.
No, thank you. It was amazing, and I loved learning these little Yiddish words and sayings throughout the book. This second question or third question comes from someone anonymous. We couldn't get their name, but they asked, did something happen for your father to leave his hiding place? And did he know the Polish family who hid him before the war?
Yes, he knew the Polish family who hid him before the war. I think my father chose to try to seek help from him because he thought he was a decent man before the war. War has a tendency to change who you are or how you will act or react. And many times we don't know what that will be, but my father took a chance and the Polish man hid him, yes.
And do you know the name of the Polish man who hid your father?
It's on the tip of my tongue. I can get it for you. In fact, my brother is probably on the Zoom. If Saul, if you're here, you want to chime in? I can't think of the family's name.
No,
Yeah.
also on the tip of my tongue, Molly. Mikhail, and the last name, my Lord, I wish it was 40 years.
It's like on the tip of my tongue, and his son stayed with us here in Ventnor for what, maybe 6 months?
For a little while. He went to
Lagoon.
Right. He went to
Lagoon.
Western Pennsylvania, then to mine.
Right, Lagoon was their last name, like Lagun, Lagoon.
Lagoon.
Okay. And I guess as a follow-up to that, do you know if they're recognized by Yad Vashem as a righteous among the nations?
Another item I have to look up.
They're not, Molly.
They're not? Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so I promise not to say anything during the questions, but please put that down on your to-do list to contact me, because we would love to help you to have them recognized so their story will be here for 50, 100 years to come plus. Very important.
Okay.
It's called Righteous Among the Nations.
So Molly, we've actually received a couple of messages that deal with this, I guess, topic or theme. What message do you have for students in general, and I would say for our Stockton students who actually joined your presentation today?
What type of message do I have to them about?
Yeah, about reading the book. What do you want them to keep in mind while reading your book and reading the story of your parents working in Atlantic City? And they were very hard workers. I definitely got that through the book.
Yes, very, very. I suppose for people who are in college now and learning about the Holocaust, I guess the theme that I keep repeating is that we must learn what happened historically. We need to get our facts. We need to learn what happened, not only to learn and to know, but to make sure we don't repeat this, that we do not repeat this kind of evil, cruelty, unkindness, genocide, and anything along those lines of human cruelty. And I also would like people to walk away from this book also understanding that people, even if they live through that kind of horrors, can walk out of that and still have empathy and understanding and show kindness for others and have that kind of resilience. And also, if people at Stockton students also get a sort of a glimmer of Atlantic City, a piece of Atlantic City that happened before they were born, but certainly not ancient history kind of thing. Probably something their parents couldn't relate to, going on the boardwalk and the piers and things the way Atlantic City was back in my day.
Thank you. Yes, and I was born in Atlantic City, and I grew up in Atlantic City, and hearing you talk about some of the landmarks that were there that we can sort of see the shadows now. I always knew that there were special things in these locations, but I was just born a little too late to see them, in the high point. But thank you for describing them in your book, because it really brought a smile to me. Yes, sorry.
Somebody suggested that I start a book tour, meaning have a tour of Atlantic City of the places I talk about in my book. That's not, like you said, Irvin, some of them are no longer there. Some of them have new structures on the place. Some of them are something different altogether. So who knows? Maybe once COVID is gone, we'll have a book tour, starting and ending at the Seacrest.
Yes, that would be great. So this next question I have is from Dr. Dinka Hondias, and she asked, how did your parents manage the unusual visitors they welcomed to your hotel without management? She's also referencing the relationship with the local police department, the Atlantic City Police Department.
Irvin, is it without judgment? How did they manage unusual visitors they welcomed without judgment?
Without judgment.
Thank you, Mary.
I don't know. I don't know. But how did they do it without judgment? I honestly don't know. I mean, they had a job to do. They had a business to run. They had a family to take care of. Just those three things alone, there's not a whole lot of leisure time to be judgmental that is there. I guess especially my father just thought, it's sort of, it is what it is, and just do what you need to do, but keep quiet, do it quietly, don't cause trouble, and pay the rent. That's all he needed from you. And as I said earlier, did he agree with those lifestyles or a pimp's business? Absolutely not. I talk about this in the book. It was Yom Kippur. We were coming out of synagogue, and there was an Atlantic City police officer directing traffic because there's a lot of people coming and going. It was the Rodef Shalom synagogue on Pacific Avenue. And as my mother and father and I came out of the shul, Fisher, the pimp, walks by. And he had already moved out of the hotel. And there was this whole big reunion. He gives my father a big hug. My father hugs him. And my father says, how's business? And Fisher says to my father, how's your business? And as this is all happening, I see the Atlantic City police officer directing traffic, and his jaw is down to his feet. I mean, his mouth is wide open, and you can just tell by his expression. He's like, how do these two know each other? How could these two possibly know each other? And, Fisher and my father exchanged a couple words, and we went home to break the fast, and God knows where Fisher went, and we never saw him again. So a long answer to that question.
That was perfect. Thank you. And I'm going to have the concluding question that we're all thinking. What did we forget to ask you that you would like to conclude with? What did we leave out? A message, something you would like to conclude? And before you answer that, I'll give you a minute or two to think about it. That's like
Okay.
the $64,000 question. But the young people here know not what we're talking about, that game show. When we conclude and we say thank you and we wave goodbye, those of you that would like to stay on, it will not be recorded. We're going to have a get together of the Yiddish Club. You're all welcome, and it will be headed by Mona Traki-Oslik. So please stay with us, and it will not be recorded. We're just going to have an informal get together. Okay, Molly, I'll ask it again. What did we forget to ask you?
Well, I don't think anyone forgot to ask anything. I'll tell you about a question that someone asked me after reading the book. And she said, did your parents know what you were doing all the while? And like in a lot of stories, I'm here, there, and the next place, and not really very supervised by, no parental supervision. And so my friend said to me, did your mother know what you were up to half of the time? And I never really thought about it, but we grew up, we did not have helicopter parents hovering over us. So back in my day, people, kids would leave for the day. You'd get 50 cents and go to Steel Pier, and you spent the whole day at Steel Pier. So I guess the real question was how did I live through that whole hotel experience and come out as normal as I did, I think was the underlying question. And I think it's because, my parents instilled, basic principles and what's right and what's wrong and what you do and what you don't do. And I suppose maybe they were just lucky it all worked out. So, but other than that, I think everyone on the Zoom, you all asked great questions and made me even think a little bit. So thank you all.
Thank you. And Irvin, I'm going to ask you please to unmute everybody so we can clap and say goodbye and wave to each other, because this is a result of COVID that, we just don't, yes, we don't have that human connection.
Right.
And I'm waving to particularly my students and giving them full credit. I want you to be impressed that Stockton students came and joined us today.
Thank you,
amazing on a Sunday.